Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome, one and all, to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean at @BMaxDean on Twitter, and I am here with Nick Merriam, our resident draft. Oh my goodness, I think I am confused between our live shows or not, but okay. So I'm here with Nick Merriam. He's our director of draft content and scouting, and we are here to talk about a myriad of things today. We have the combine news that's coming out, so news that's related to the combine, news that's related to the NFL that's just coming forth because they're all meeting together at the combine, and we are going to talk about Nick's defensive line and basically edge and interior rankings for the 2023 prospects. All right, we made it through that. Nick, how you doing?
Doing well. This is a really exciting time of the year. I mean, it always is. Like, it's consistently exciting, except for like July and June and maybe late May, which for me is still exciting because that's when my birthday is. But this is like news.
It's gonna stop being exciting at some point.
Yeah, this is like news highway central. Like, the notifications are on, and it will be that way until free agency first wave ends, and it's just gonna be. Something crazy is going to happen every day here until probably like March 25th or something. And then we'll probably have a couple weeks downward, and then it's going to be back up again for the draft.
Yeah. There is so much that's happening right now, especially because there is a fair amount of quarterback movement. And it seems like every year now we're saying, oh, there's more than there used to be. And it seems like that might just be a trend. I think teams are just loosening their grips on franchise players. They're being a little bit more realistic about how long these players are going to affect their franchise. I mean, we saw players like Matthew Stafford move. We saw Deshaun Watson move. We saw some of the other big names. We might see Lamar Jackson move potentially, even though he's probably going to get tagged at the very least. Carr, Rodgers, Brady, Manning was kind of the first one, I think, outside of some of, just fringe top 10 guys who ended up moving around a little bit and having some success with later teams. But aside from that, there's plenty to get into. And I think the first one that we should chat about here is your team. We've got two pieces of news regarding them. One is kind of all encompassing with where they are, and that is Daniel Snyder took out a $55 million secret loan. So essentially, he pulled equity out of the Commanders without clearance from the other major ownership percentages and used that money. And that is just one facet of all of the financial misconduct that he is alleged to have taken part in. You, being Commanders fan, are familiar with some of his other activities, so I'm going to give the floor to you. But needless to say, it has been pretty messy in the DC area for the Commanders the past couple of weeks.
And I'm trying to find the name of the minority owner, Alan Kestenbaum, in Atlanta. And the reason I bring up his name is because this is going to kind of extend from the whole discussion of the reason that Snyder can't take this money out without consulting his minority owners is this occurred before the 40% shares owned by Fred Smith, who's the head of FedEx and owned part of the team, sort of the naming rights of the stadium. He is now gone. He sold his share to Snyder because Snyder bought him out because he didn't want to be part of it after the name change and all that nonsense. This is effectively we've been diving into the books and trying to find all this information since then. And this is the big, like, DOJ is now investigating where this money came from. And it wasn't his because 40% of this $55 million is owned by Fred Smith and the other minority owner whose name I can't remember. But the reason a lot of people think that this is probably going to end up being a long-term court case that is going to go beyond the sale and continue to have Daniel Snyder dealing with this is because it's clear that Snyder didn't want to open up his books for the last couple of years, and people suspect it's because of this. And there's a story where Alan Kestenbaum, who I believe is Canadian and wanted to buy into the NFL and now is a minority owner of the Falcons, wanted to buy a minority share of Washington from Fred Smith. And Dan Snyder said to Fred Smith, or it might have been the other minority owner, I don't remember. No, he'll never get accepted. Like they have to prove him. They'll never accept him as a minority owner, and he'll never get it. And then he gets accepted as a minority owner about 4 months later. So obviously that was not true. And the idea is that specific moment being after when this loan came out is Snyder trying to not open his books up for the sale, right? That's like really diving into the weeds of this whole thing. But then there's all these other stories that came out about how Snyder is, paying himself $10 million. And then on top of that, another $4.5 million fee for a logo on the side of his airplane for advertising. They effectively claimed that he's using the team as his own piggy bank, allowing him to like just take money out and buy things like the big yacht he was on in Europe throughout the time when the United States the government was effectively like trying to bring him into Congress and question him.
Yeah, he had a subpoena out to testify.
So, I mean, it's a lot of bad news stuff, and it's really unfortunate because, you see things coming out about like today or yesterday we had like the grades for team facilities, and Washington's are obviously horrible. It's because they haven't paid any money to upgrade them in a long time other than Fields. And a lot of that's because Snyder is in debt, supposedly. He's $1 billion in debt because of probably losses in revenue. They have some of the lowest revenue locally in the NFL, apparently, just bringing in from, things like merchandise and TV viewership and things like that. It's bad news, and he needs to sell the team to get out of debt and be able to do all that. And he will. I don't think legally there's anything that's going to stop him from doing that. But getting this whole secret loan thing is going to be a long-term investigation, and generally these people don't end up doing jail time because just it's just, this is where we live. But he could see some heavy losses financially because of this. And I think this is why the sale is happening. He wants indemnation from the NFL. They can't protect him. I don't see how that's possible. They're not going to stop the Department of Justice from doing their jobs. And that's kind of his clause for selling the team. And I think at first Goodell probably said, yeah, we'll help you with that. But now they can no longer can. So that's what's slowing up the sale. And supposedly it's going to be down to Josh Harris and Jeff Bezos. There might be another name in there that we don't know yet. Harris, we don't know if he can afford everything because, again, this is a fixer-upper franchise. You have to effectively, rebuild the facility, get a new stadium, invest in the local area to rebuild the brand. All this stuff has to happen, which is why Bezos might eventually end up buying the team because he's the guy with the money to do that at a time, quite frankly. Considering, time and money is a correlative thing there. But
yeah, you're telling me.
But it's just there's a difficulty then of him not having a good relationship with Bezos. He doesn't want to sell to him. The NFL might have to step in and say, we're not approving you to sell to anyone but Bezos. There might be a thing that comes up where the NFL takes hold of the sale because of legal actions that are going on. It is a very complex situation, and the only thing that we know for certain is that Snyder is effectively ruined this franchise, and they should have had him out 5 years ago, probably more. And it is spiraling, and it's unfortunate from a fan standpoint, not just because all this is bad, but also because I think you see things like the report come out and people go, oh man, the Commanders suck. And that's just it encapsulates everybody else in that building, when the reality of the situation is, I think the general manager's done a good job, coaching's done a decent job, the roster isn't that bad. It's just Dan Snyder. Dan Snyder is the one who sucks, right? And it's reflecting bad on everything else.
Yeah, that's the consensus. Dan Snyder allegedly sucks. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Speaking of the Commanders, the second piece of news that we have is Deron Payne, the defensive tackle, is officially the first player to be franchise tagged this season. His tag is going to be $18.937 million. And now that makes Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne the two highest paid players on the Commanders. Well, actually, I guess Terry McLaurin technically is higher paid.
I think his cap hit this year, though, is still 12. So it's not the highest cap hit this year.
Right. So he's the highest paid, but the Commanders currently have over $40 million in cap space dedicated to just these two interior players. So doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be there long term, but he is a very
35.
valuable player. And
Darnell only makes 17 a year, so 35.
well, no, not in terms of annual value. I'm talking about cap hit. So
Well,
Jonathan Allen's cap hit's over 21.
Okay, it's over 21. Okay, so
and Payne
it's a big
is
cap
at
into the
just about
interior
19.
defensive line, right?
Yeah. So it's a lot of investment, but also the cap space in particular. So they could potentially restructure Allen to bring his cap hit down if they want to. If they're not going after a quarterback, maybe they don't necessarily need space because they're currently at about 16.2 million, according to overthecap.com. Or maybe they will end up trading Payne to recoup some picks. But
I think the trade thing's possible. Supposedly they got offered a second-round pick last year and they turned it down. I don't know if they get more. I don't know if they'd be more willing to accept something like that at this point, maybe to clear the cap space. I think they might be able to get a little more than a second-round pick at this point, even if it's just like another fourth or something. They might take that. But, teams are interested in this type of player. I mean, we see all the interest in social media. Like, people want interior defenders. It's a position that's increasing in value, especially because if you can guarantee pass rush, which I don't know that Payne is necessarily guaranteed pass rush, but every year he's played, he's either been a really good run defender or a really good pass rusher. So you get one or the other kind of consistently. I think an extension they will really try to get done. I don't know that they'll go above like 21 a year. So I don't know what he's looking for. And as some of these guys get paid, it's going to be harder to pay him. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets traded. I think the worst thing they can do is just kind of let him be tagged and play it out. But also this is a coaching staff that needs to win now. So I don't know how, much they're really willing to just go get young players and try to replace him. There are some defensive tackles we're going to talk about in this video that I think would be good replacements for Payne and would be fine in terms of going from him to another guy, even with a rookie. But it's tough because I think that they have something that nobody else in this league has, and that is a interior duo that works really well together specifically, and is both like Pro Bowl players. And it's fun. It's interesting to me because I think he hits the market and he might hit the upwards of 22 million a year, maybe even more, based on how some of these guys get paid. I'd expect Hargrave is probably gonna be the highest paid, but there's a lot of defensive tackles. There's also Draymond Jones, there's Dexter Lawrence. A lot of contracts are about to happen. So that drives up the price, obviously.
Quinnen Williams is about to make a lot of money.
Right. So there's, that market's going to explode this offseason. And he's going to benefit from it. My thing has long been, I think in Washington's case, he is probably worth somewhere in the low 20s just based on the way the market's gone because of how different that duo with Allen is they have, how important that has been to their defensive kind of like identity. But I think once he becomes a free agent, whoever pays him is overpaying because I think, for example, like the Falcons or Bears, if they go out and they give him that much money, he is their DT1. Like they're expecting him to be their stud defensive tackle and their like first pass rusher. I don't think Deron Payne is that type of player. I think he's a guy that benefits greatly from being the dude who can kind of take up bodies, take on double teams, allow Jonathan Allen to kind of get free and then get the production himself. And then as teams like try to adjust to Allen, like Payne kind of benefits himself a little bit this year in terms of being a pass rusher. I don't think he's going to give you like consistent 11.5 sack production like he did this year. In fact, I think I would go out on a limb here and say that that's probably the most sacks he will ever have in his career. So I don't know. This is one of those situations where we talk about this consistently. Like you don't want to be paying at the top of the free agency market because you're paying top dollar for guys who generally left for a reason. And then secondarily, like you don't know that they're fitting necessarily with the pieces you already have in place. Whereas Washington, I think if he stays, his price is going to be lower than whatever he gets on the market. He's going to get more money if he becomes a free agent. I think that's the way that generally works.
Well, I mean, it's sometimes that is the case for like slightly lower level players, where if there is just a shortage of that position, then someone will end up overpaying a little bit. But I don't think for a lot of these top of the market guys, the agent is aware of what else is out there. So either they just decide to the negotiation gets to the point where it's what the player will accept or it doesn't, you know what I mean? And then they'll get that out there. So the actual idea of bidding wars, it's like, it doesn't happen too often.
But it's not bidding wars between teams. It's bidding wars between contracts, right? Like if Draymond Jones gets signed, that's going to drive Deron Payton's price up because effectively the staggering of paying these defensive tackles hypothetically is going to get higher as the offseason goes, right?
It could push it that way, but also doesn't necessarily matter if he's a free agent or not. I'm just saying, so like if you officially become a free agent, then you may get to a point where if the other primary defensive tackle goes off the market and there's two teams that really want Payne, there is potential for one team to come in and say, okay, we're upping our offer to ensure that you come sign with us. It doesn't actually happen as much as people think. Usually it's just like, this is our offer, this is our offer. And then there's a baseline there and you're like, okay, I'm going to take this offer most likely. Let's hash out some of the details of the contract language. And you know what I mean? I'm just saying that getting more on the open market, it doesn't happen as often as you think. It only happens if like you wait an entire year and then you become a free agent, right? So it's more about the timing and staggering that you're talking about over the course of an entire year than it is actually being a free agent. So, you know, or if just a team just lowballs you because they just don't have the money available, and then you have a variety of options once you hit free agency. But that's just something that I feel like is slightly misrepresented. It's like once you get to free agency, like there's just bidding wars, there's just open bidding for players. Doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
Usually you get just like a set offer and you select between those.
Yes. And I think a lot of people are upset about the tag who are Washington fans because we've had like the Kirk Cousins saga, which I think is its own thing. And I kind of like and then you had the Brandon Sheriff saga, which to me was like, they had the guy for 7 years because he was a first-round pick, fifth-year option, tagged him twice. And then they didn't pay him $20 million a year as a guard. And I'm not upset about that personally, considering he didn't really stay healthy that often either. They used the tag as an extension effectively. I think in this case, though, it's a good thing because if they do end up reaching an extension, it's going to lower that cap hit probably. And allow them to go and probably cover something like the backup quarterback that they're hoping to get in free agency this offseason, whether that be a Heineke or a Marcus Mariota or something like that. So I don't know. He's not. So one thing I need to ask you. So this is the non-exclusive franchise tag, which means if someone were to negotiate with him and sign him, they get 2 first-round picks. But really, what it means is they would get traded, right? Like it's not ever really 2 first-round picks. It's more often just a tag and trade if that happens, right?
Not necessarily. So basically, the way that a non-exclusive franchise tag works is any other team can now openly negotiate with Deron Payne. If they come to an agreement on a contract with full contract language, it's an offer sheet, and if then they can match, and it's like down to the very last detail. So if the payment structure is like the overall amount is okay with the Commanders, but the payment structure is an issue for some reason. This has been something that's been done in the past. It's not done as much anymore, where you try and force the original team to refuse to match by making it challenging for them to fit it into their salary cap or whatever the case is. That is a possibility. But if the Commanders match, Payne either has the option to sign that or continue to just not sign his franchise tender or whatever the case is. But if they elect not to match it, then the other team has to surrender 2 first-round picks. Payne signs the contract with them, and it's done. There is really no time that the tag and trade only happens if the Commanders are not really interested in keeping Payne on the team. The 2 first-round picks are really there as like, okay, we really want to keep him, but for whatever reason, we just can't get it done, and this other team is making a push for him. So if Washington is actively trying to negotiate with him and another team sets up a contract to get him away, then that would happen. But the tag and trade is still on the table if the Commanders are like, yeah, we're probably not going to keep this guy, because again, that's $19 million cash this year that that Daniel Snyder's going to have to spend, right? That's budgetary money, right? And so if he's kind of short on money, that might already be a foregone conclusion. Now, the matching of the contract, the lack of matching for a player to get pulled away, it just doesn't happen that much anymore, because of the timing that is involved. Like, you have that money dedicated to this player that might ultimately be re-signed by his original team. So teams don't really do that anymore. It's like you only really kind of take that risk for really special players like quarterbacks or something like that, and they usually get the exclusive franchise tag anyway. So it's just just not something that we see super often.
Yeah. And this is just a minor detail, but those 2 first-round picks, do you know if they're like for example, if Denver were, or not Denver, that's a bad example. If the Falcons were to sign him, is that the Falcons' 8th pick, or is it a compensatory pick at the end of the first round? How does that work? This isn't going to happen. It's just
it's if the Falcons were to sign him in this situation, it would be their 8th overall pick and whatever their first round pick is next year.
Okay. Yeah. Something that really won't ever happen except for with quarterbacks. So, the non-exclusive effectively for all non-quarterbacks, you're going to see the non-exclusive tag just because they don't really need to protect against that specifically.
You could potentially see it with like a defensive end or a wide receiver, but maybe. But I doubt that you would in any
it's
other
just like
situation.
why would you raise the cap hit more? I feel like for a lot of teams it's more valuable to keep it lower for negotiation reasons, right? Just because a lot of agents will use that like tag as like a baseline for like what we're building off of, right?
For annual value, yeah. A lot of times the 2-year average of the tag is many times a baseline for negotiations. But it's really, it used to be that in the NFL, more positions could impact the game at a ridiculous level. And now, comparatively to the quarterback, it's just not very common. If Jamar Chase has an insane year and for whatever reason, at the end of his rookie deal, and he's just the best receiver in football by a long shot, like he's like Megatron, but he's just expected to play for a long time, and Cincinnati can't get a deal done with him because they don't have the money, but they don't want to let him go. Like, that was like a hypothetical situation where you could see something like that, but it's just outside of quarterback, it's not common, and quarterbacks usually get the exclusive tender anyway. So it's like kind of a, bygone era.
So I would expect in this situation they're gonna try and get an extension done. I don't know how long they're gonna take with it, but because I think they will kick the tires on the trade at some point. I don't know if they'll accept anything. Like, I think they're gonna look for a first round pick, and I don't know if they're gonna get it.
I think they will because DeForest Buckner. I mean, I know he still had his 5th-year option left, but
I don't think Deron Payne's a better player than DeForest Buckner, though. Like, I think Jonathan Allen is. I don't know. It's the market.
I think you could probably manage to pull a first-round pick out of somebody.
And then it would have to be a team at the end of the I don't think the teams that were trying to get him were a lot of teams with problems on defense or trying to build it kind of inside outward is the problem. And I don't know if there's like not Green Bay because they're kind of picking higher, but maybe Green Bay, but like a Chiefs, that would be like at the end of the first round is willing to trade. They come to mind
a bit for me. To put a guy like Payne next to a guy like Chris Jones would probably really help their defense. And I'm not sure that there's necessarily a player at that point of the draft that would strongly discourage them from making that move. I mean, they did it with Orlando Brown, and they might be a pick swap of some varying variety as well. But I think you could probably end up with a first rounder out of this. But let's move on to another news topic. This one is a little bit more unfortunate, and we don't have all the details on it. Jalen Carter, the defensive tackle from Georgia, who has been talked about going as high as first or second overall in the draft, is possibly involved in a fatal car crash involving a teammate. There may have been street racing involved, and the allegation is that he misled police about his involvement in it. He had a warrant out. He returned to Georgia for that, I believe, posted bail, and is now actually back at the combine. And so we're not going to speculate too much, but I believe that those are the facts as they stand right now.
Yeah, so obviously, legal procedures pending on a lot of this. I think see a lot of people on Twitter that are kind of like, oh, he posted bond and that means he's done. That's not how that works at all. That just means you're not locked up still, which, this is why he's back in Indianapolis as of like 15 minutes ago, I think, maybe a little longer, maybe 30 minutes ago, to kind of resume interviews and his workout apparently, which is interesting. But, this is all alleged at this point. There was obviously a car crash involving a player and a staff member of Georgia. Two people died in it. Carter supposedly was a mile away when the crash happened, and the police questioned him, and he said he had no involvement. And now they're saying that he was there when the crash happened. It's alleged, anyways, and that obviously Max said it may involve. Your mind kind of jumps to thinking there might have been some street racing going on there because that's kind of what's implied by the situation. I guarantee you that's kind of what is being thought here based on the misdemeanor charges, which were reckless driving, and I believe one other of them, but it was like careless endangerment or something like that. That might be wrong, but really tough situation, I think, for not just Georgia, him, and I think the NFL draft community as a whole, really, because we spend a lot of time watching these players and getting exciting for them and kind of talking about like what they're going to be at the NFL level, and they have these careers like laid out in front of them, like of what they not necessarily will be, of what they could be. And now we're just going to have to put that on pause a little bit. And that's not necessarily, a tragedy for the draft community. We can do that for sure. But it's tough because I don't feel comfortable kind of speculating as to what this will do to his draft stock. I think we've seen not many people do that. I think it's kind of in bad faith a little bit to do so just because we don't know what's going to happen yet. I would assume it's probably going to hurt his stock at some degree, but it's way too hard to say at this point. We had two similar situations. And when I say similar, I mean like vaguely with Lael Collins and Laramie Tunsil. Both of those were draft night. So we're not talking about like a month and 3 weeks ahead. Both of those were, in one case, something that was alleged and then was disproven. And then he didn't even get drafted in Lael Collins' case. And then in Laramie Tunsil's case, something that I would argue is just the NFL being hardos and not really caring about something that doesn't actually matter, and they've actually even lessened the rules on in terms of marijuana usage, but whatever. And that didn't even hurt his stock a whole lot either. He just fell from what would have been maybe a top 5 pick to being a top 13 pick. And then both guys go on to have really good careers. So, that is obviously not out of the question for Carter at this point. But so is the opposite direction of that, where he's just not involved in the draft process. And, I'm not an expert on Georgia state law. I'm not an expert on, traffic laws or like how this would go, but my initial thought process is that these initial misdemeanors are probably not going to be all the charges if they're found to be true. And, for Georgia, who is already dealing with the tragedy of this whole situation, it's another difficult step.
So I'll just say this. So for Lyle Collins, that was interesting because he actually said that if he falls out of I think the second round, if I'm not mistaken, then he was not going to sign with a team, and he would just get redrafted the following year because it was actually more beneficial for him to have the 3-year maxed out undrafted free agent contract than it was for him to have the 4-year, close to minimum deals that you get when you're like third round and beyond.
Yeah.
So that was partly due to his wishes. But according to the Athens Banner Herald, they said that an Athens Clark County Police press release said the investigation found that Chandler LaCroix, driver of a 2021 Ford Expedition, and Jalen Carter, driver of a 2021 Jeep Trackhawk, were operating their vehicles in a manner consistent with racing shortly after leaving the downtown Athens area about 2:30 a.m. So that it's being actively stated by the police that is a primary factor in this case. And
Okay.
I don't know. Street racing is a misdemeanor offense in Georgia. It carries a maximum penalty of a $1,000 fine plus court costs and fees and a jail term of 12 months. Jail term is not required by law and may be served on probation depending judge jurisdiction, but it also depends if they will try and charge him with like potential involuntary manslaughter type stuff. Like, so there's more to it, but ultimately, based on his profile, he probably would get out without any jail time. And as far as just street racing goes, meaning that like he may be currently very optimistic about his outlook, and that's all kind of glossing over the fact that somebody died, which is
I mean,
awful.
What I struggle with personally with this stuff is that, and people compared it to this, and it's hard to compare it to this because of something like kind of minor, quite frankly, but we just kind of had this situation about a couple years ago with like Henry Ruggs, and it's not the same thing because Ruggs was operating the vehicle that got in the crash. It wasn't street racing; it was him on his own. But in both cases, these things happen because of effectively like young adults making careless, stupid mistakes, right? And not thinking about the consequences of their actions. And in one case, the outcome was so bad that this guy is done. Like Henry Ruggs is done. Like he's never playing football ever again. Jalen Carter very, very much could have been in that situation. And he's, lucky almost that he like isn't a part of the car that's involved with the crash. But then again, like he's still a part of what's happening here. And then you think about it again, it's like, okay, well, it was something stupid and something bad happened. And this happens with young kids a lot. And a lot of times bad things don't happen, but it doesn't make it any less okay. And, this is the fine line of managing these young athletes to an extent where they have to understand that although their life is flying ahead of them and everything is going so well. And, you're going from being, a kid at high school to literally a nationally recognized NFL player who you're a celebrity, right? And that happens in the span of like 3 years for this guy. I think we need to do a better job of supplying role models that help these things be avoided because it's happened more than it should over the past 3 or 4 years. And it's a tragedy because, look, I don't think no one's calling Jalen Carter a bad person. I know people are like, oh, Todd McShay, had character issues on his. I don't think Todd McShay knew this is what was happening. I think he was talking about things in the locker room when he went on ESPN and said that it was before this crash had even occurred, I believe. But it is a lack of planning, thought process, and it's something that's going to ultimately be a giant question mark when he does go and interview today in front of media, in front of teams. And you can't really predict from this point forward how that's going to affect the way they think about it, the way he moves forward with his NFL career, because it's a big mistake. This is not like, and even mistake is probably too light of a word, right? Like this is something that went horribly wrong, and he's going to be answering about it probably years into his NFL career.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of anything farther would probably be speculation, but you also just want to make sure that, if he does get out of this okay, that he understands that like that is not a indication that that you can get away with this kind of stuff at this level, right? That, that he's just very fortunate. And I don't know the guy, but I just want to leave it kind of at the facts. And yes, drunk driving is terrible. Like, driving far beyond the speed limit is also terrible. And I don't know how much of that was involved in this. There's implications that there was alcohol involved, but I don't know if he was or not. So ultimately it's just it's a bad situation, and we're going to move on to the next topic. And it's easy to make a decision that ruins yours and other people's lives, so just be aware of that. I guess that's as deep into it as we can go.
Yeah.
All right, I'm trying to fix my camera right now, but in other news, the Eagles hire their quarterbacks coach Brian Johnson as their new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, a little bit of a lighter topic, right? We saw this coming, right? He was being interviewed for some head coaching jobs, some offensive coordinator positions. He was next in line. I don't know a whole lot about his background, but the league seems very high on him, and the Eagles ultimately, we've seen this from really good organizations like the 49ers, like the Chiefs, like going from great coordinators to great coordinators. And I think this is another example of that, likely.
Yeah, tend to agree. It's a pipeline for them. It's probably who they kind of knew that they were going to go with, try to do some due diligence. And he's back with the team, which gives them some continuity considering they lost both of their coordinators this offseason. I haven't done a deep dive into him. He was a candidate. I think he was even a candidate for some head coaching jobs for some of the teams. So clearly a guy with a good reputation around the NFL, and should help with Jalen Hurts' career trajectory.
Yeah, and it's continuity. He was there as the quarterback coach already. So, keeping things the same is going to be helpful for a team that wants the same results they got this year.
All right. Agreed. Okay. Playoff Lenny is officially done in Tampa. So his second Florida team is now gone by the wayside. And I think we always expected this to be a short-term thing. I think, getting him on a cheap deal and then bringing everybody back after the Super Bowl championship, it probably wasn't long for that roster construction. And now he is officially released. I'm not sure what he would get on the open market, what he'd be willing to play for. I wouldn't expect it to be a whole heck of a lot because he hasn't really done much in a while.
Yeah, honestly, I think he really did well in Tampa for himself. He largely exceeded my expectations for what he would look like. I didn't love him as a prospect coming out comparative to what everyone else thought. Thought he had a decent time in Jacksonville, and I thought when he got cut and had to go to Tampa that things were kind of spiraling for him. And obviously he played his best football and had, a big part of the team that went to win a Super Bowl, and really was quite good last year too. Not as good this year with a beat up offensive line. I think there's a place for him on a roster somewhere as kind of a power back, as like another guy that you kind of have as an option. I don't know if he's going to be a lead back anymore, but he's carved out a decent career for running back. I don't know, today if he's a guy who would go fourth overall again, which is, ultimately probably unfair to his development because, the expectation for a guy like that is to come into Jacksonville and quite literally be the type of player that makes them a Super Bowl contender. And I think kind of the fluky AFC Championship year that they had, which wasn't fluky, like they were very talented, but it was not a team that was going to consistently contend with the way they were built. Didn't help his career either because, it was going to be hard to put up similar team results year after year there. But you have to give him credit because he's stuck around. He's been healthier the past couple of years than he was even maybe early in his career. And he's been a similar player that has held up at age 28 in the NFL as a running back. I mean, this is, Derrick Henry's 27. He started to have some injuries. He's kind of seeing some issues with that. This is around when running backs start to break down a little bit, and he's still chugging along a little bit, and he will be somewhere next year, at the very least as a running back number 2, I'd expect, and good for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely a place for him. It's really a question of how much, of a pay cut he's willing to take and still play. But another player who is released, Kenny Golladay, the wide receiver for the New York Giants. This was incoming. We knew it was. This was, by many people, thought to be one of the worst contracts signed in the past few years. It certainly turned out to be that way. Put up very little in the way of numbers. Was injured for the majority of his time there and relatively ineffective when he was on the field, which is, it's kind of sad because he was a fun player to watch when he was with the Lions. He was like the one good part of the Lions over that 4-year stretch that he was there. They didn't have much going on aside from Matthew Stafford, and he missed a lot of time. And so just seeing Golladay go catch those deep balls was fun, but he had injury issues before as well, and it was just seemed to be worse when he got to New York and got paid a lot of money to not play. And I don't think there's an effort issue there. I think it's just a guy who had a physical play style and his body didn't hold up. But maybe the Giants fans would say otherwise. But
it was a bad match from the beginning. There are some numbers out there that Daniel Jones's downfield throwing efficiency is very good. It's because when he throws it downfield, it's always to like easy, wide open receivers. And Galladay's not that guy. You needed a Stafford type to kind of give him these 50-50 balls to make these acrobatic catches. And Daniel Jones is just not the quarterback to A, be that aggressive, and then B, have the ball placement ability to put your guy in a situation to make those catches downfield. I think he is a player that buying low on right now is really intriguing, depending on who you are. Like, I'm not certain. You need to have a good quarterback and throw the ball downfield to sign this guy. But teams like Baltimore, I think, should be interested. Who needs a receiver and might have Lamar still next year on their roster. I think a team like even the Rams trying to pair him back with Matthew Stafford would be interesting. Maybe go back to Detroit. I think Jared Goff is the type of quarterback who can help this guy play better than maybe they had a DJ Chark type last year, who I think is a similar. Maybe a little bit faster, shows a little more downfield separation type player. But again, like a lot of those sideline fade balls thrown up to him, and he produced decently when he was healthy last year in Detroit. There's a spot for him somewhere. He's not going to make $20 million a year. I think the lack of success from the Giants early on was tough for him, and I don't think there's an effort issue, but I don't think he was bought in. I think at the end of the time with Daboll, you saw him buy in a little bit more, but they kind of had him penciled in as the wide receiver 4. So he was more of a blocking type, but you could see his effort in blocking was getting better as the year went on. It just never matched up with him in New York. And I think it's tough because he had 2 contracts that were similar. One of them was the Giants. One of them was Cincinnati, and he chose the Giants ultimately. That being said, at the time, the Bengals were coming off of 4-12 year with Joe Burrow's injury, and there were a lot of question marks. But the other is New York market, so maybe that's intriguing in itself. But he could have been a Bengal. That being said, if the Bengals got him, I don't know if they would have drafted Jamar Chase. So all those dominoes there, but he's going to be he'll have like a Zay Jones type contract, and we'll see if it'd probably be a 1 or 2 year type thing, and we'll see if he gets an extension beyond that this year, because this is where he can go and kind of, I don't want to say save his career, but kind of show that he still has maybe starting outside wide receiver value.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it would be hard to commit much of anything to him at this point. There's got to be a fair amount of incentives, I think, for a team to really feel comfortable. And I don't think you can bank on him as a starter at this point, but maybe you can bring him in if you're also drafting a player highly that you want to, maybe if you're in the Quentin Johnston realm of the draft and you kind of know that's the kind of guy that you want to get, then maybe you get him in so that you don't have to put Johnston in, throw him into the fire, and kind of let him take over at some point. And then maybe within that, you can get Golladay to revitalize his career a little bit. So I think that would be, kind of a fitting pairing. All right, let's get into the quarterbacks of it all. Aaron Rodgers appeared on the Aubrey Marcus podcast and talked about his time in the darkness and where he is in terms of deciding on his NFL future. And I promise it's soon, is what he said, essentially. It's going to be real soon. And if you don't like how long I'm taking, then it's your fault. That's what he says. Basically, that is like I'm paraphrasing. I hope that's clear. But yes, Aaron Rodgers is still undecided.
People keep saying that he's like manipulating the media, and I've started to kind of like, I don't know if he's manipulating the media, but I think he likes people not knowing what he's doing. I do think that that's kind of a part of this game is he wants people to kind of be like, oh, when's Aaron Rodgers going to make a decision? And he's like, that's funny to me. But yeah, Jeff Darlington went on ESPN 2 days before he said this other thing. And he said, Aaron Rodgers is going, there's no way that this relationship's being mended with Green Bay and he's going to be gone. And then 2 days later, he goes, he's probably going to be back in Green Bay. Like, no one knows what's going on. Don't listen to Rodgers' stories. There's no real certainty. I think the most we've learned about Aaron Rodgers is Brandon Marshall, who never drops nuggets. So I believe this, saying that he had 4 people from the league say that they were interested in Rodgers. So there's 4 teams interested. Now, if one of those is Green Bay, it might be just Green Bay and 3 others. Which could be like the Raiders and the Jets and some other team that we don't know yet. But the league is, I've heard Miami too, is when we had somebody who was close to Rodgers say Miami would be a team. We haven't learned anything about where he wants to go. And I don't think we're going to for a while. And I would expect Green Bay is going to try and get this done before the draft so they can make their draft picks now. But I don't know that they're going to be able to because I think Rodgers has kind of put his foot down in a situation where they don't have control over the situation at all right now.
Well, one of the things that he actively said about it is that, he reflected on the Brett Favre situation and how challenging that was for him and for the team because of the continued lack of decision. And he essentially said that he's aware of that and he wants to make a decision soon and he doesn't want to put the team through that. He also said, that, if you think I'm acting like a diva, then I understand, but the reality is for me that this is just about my life. So, it's a challenging decision. And once it's made, I'll go forward with, full intent and intensity. Again, all paraphrasing, but, he was pretty upfront about the fact that he, didn't want to push it into March or whatever the case is. And we're kind of there. So, yeah. I suspect it will be done before free agency, and then the trade talks will really heat up, and then that'll be done. I don't think he'll be back in Green Bay at this point. I think what Aaron Rodgers really enjoys is just people talking about him, period. And so this is just a way to maintain that because, if you just make a decision and then you get traded, then the news cycle will be all about where you are, and then it will die down, and then it'll be draft, and then you won't really be talked about heavily, except for within that specific media market for, the majority of the offseason leading up to when the season actually starts and people watch you on national TV. If you do this, you push it. Where's he going to go? Where's he going to go? He's in the darkness retreat. Where's he going to go? Okay, now he's actually going to go. Which team is going to get him? Then you get that time where it's like, okay, what's he going to look like with this receiver, and what's he going to look like in this uniform? And then you just extend all of that out a little bit. I find it hard to believe that he'll be back in Green Bay at this point, just based on the way that this has gone. I think if it was going to be Green Bay, that decision would have been probably made by now. But that's just my take on it. It's just my read on it. And I don't know how many teams are interested. I mean, if 4 teams are interested, that wouldn't shock me at all. He's still one of the best players in the league. So even though it might be a short window, it's, he is a game changer. Whereas I'm not sure some of the other guys would be. But I guess that takes us into our final piece of news for, I will throw in there that, Lamar Jackson is expected to be tagged, but I don't think that's if a deal is not met, but that's like, saying sky's blue most days. So I don't think we need to really dwell on that. But Derek Carr is officially meeting with the Jets, Saints, and Panthers at the Combine. I believe some of those meetings are already done, Saints, Panthers in particular. And met with ownership for the Saints. For sure, we'll be meeting with ownership for the Jets. So he is a real viable option for all 3 of these teams. My instinct would still say Saints there, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. Kevin Fielder, who covers Florida Atlantic Sports, was saying that they're doing their due diligence, but I don't know why the Panthers are really involved in this. I guess they're scared that they might not get one of the top QBs, and now that Seattle might be interested, maybe that's part of the process there. They might be the odd team out. But just in their situation, you can afford Carr. Your roster is really good, and if you go and you pay Carr and you're like, he's the guy who can get us over the hump to contend for a Super Bowl, and it doesn't work out, well, you kind of are stuck with him because you're not going to – I guess you could structure a contract that's similar to what the Raiders did. It's a weird – the veteran QB thing has been tough for teams because the other thing about that is you spend a year now where you're not developing a young quarterback that now you need to go back and get a rookie, and you might be drafting too low to actually get one next year, and you might learn that you have other holes that you need to fill that you either – couldn't afford this year because you're paying a veteran, and you can maybe build up depth this year to avoid those holes actually existing, which helps the development of your young QB. But also just if year 2 of a rookie QB is next year, you have a much better chance of contending for a Super Bowl than year 1 of a rookie QB next year, I think, with year 1 of Derek Carr now. And maybe year 2 of Derek Carr is good enough. I don't know, but I don't know. I think the Derek Carr 1 year in a new system, year 1 in a new system thing is real. I'm not excited about it if I'm any of these teams. I think if you're trying to sign Derek Carr, you have to be in it for the long haul a little bit. I think he's a good player, but I think the Panthers should be focused on drafting a quarterback. New Orleans, if they can make it work, maybe it makes sense because I don't think they have many options at all. And then the Jets, are where they are, where I think their roster is a lot better than Carolina's, even though they both have good rosters. And they just need, again, they're not really in the range to draft somebody. They still think Zach Wilson has some ability to development. So, they're looking for veterans because they're in a situation that's specific to them.
I think the Zach Wilson experience is probably the part of the impetus, or situations is part of the impetus for a team like the Panthers to go after a Carr, because there's nothing that says you can't both sign Carr and draft a player, right? If you let's say Indianapolis does decide to go up for Bryce Young, which there has been some buzz that they might be interested in doing that because of some of the recent statements that have been made by Chris Ballard, talking about accuracy and decision making as their primary thing. And maybe that's smoke, whatever, it doesn't matter. But let's say that they go up and get him at 1, right? The Bears move back to 4. They're like, okay, look, we're either going to get some top player at 4th overall. And then at number 2, CJ Stroud is gone. Okay, so your 2 guys that are probably your 1 impact players for you to some degree are gone at the quarterback position. Then you are at odds with the Raiders, potentially the Falcons, and possibly even other teams for Levis and or Richardson, right? So it's you should never, unless you have the top pick in the draft or maybe the top 2 picks in the draft, you should never go in without a player who's penciled in to start at a position and assume that you'll get him somewhere else in the top 10. I just feel like that's how you should go about doing things. And so if the Panthers want to go after Carr, I don't really see anything wrong with that, personally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you made a good refute there. And I think it also, I mean, we just talked about the price, but, maybe there's a thought process where they could be driving it up because there's more teams involved. But also if they get him, maybe they keep the Saints from getting him, and that helps them out a little bit. Obviously, their focus is quarterback, and they're going to try and acquire anybody who can help them be better at that position next year. They also apparently are in discussions with Sam Darnold about bringing him back, so that's something else that's going on. I'm really interested to see if we're going to get a trade this week into the top 5. I think that the more we're getting, information from these teams, the more we're hearing about teams who are interested in the quarterback position in this draft, especially because there's 4 guys who clearly the NFL views as top 10. I know Richardson seems to be a little bit more all over the place, but with some people who are like, I wouldn't take him until like late day 2, but there are teams that are going to have top 10 grades on that guy. They're going to go probably before the 9th pick, and you're going to have to move up to get one of them. So, but I think they have to. I think they have to get one of these guys. Even if Carr's in the building, like you say, like I just don't think he could be their long-term plan. I think
that's fine.
I think the thing about Levis and Richardson is that's nice with the Derek Carr is like they need development. Like give them that time,
Yeah, that's exactly part of it too. It's not just that you might not get him; it's that even if you do, you don't necessarily want to have them out there week 1 playing against the Saints defense or whatever. So, all right. Let's talk prospects. So we have the defensive line prospects today. You got your top 5 defensive tackles. You got your top 10 edge players. That is, I believe, how we have this set up. Am I right?
Yep.
All right. Let's talk interior first.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about what qualifies for you in terms of your rankings, like what puts guys the highest, and what it is you particularly look for when you're scouting interior defenders.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of guys who can get off the ball quickly, and this is not really a class that has a whole lot of that. You see more like run defender, point of attack, strength types, which are fine. Like, but I think I generally want guys who attacking downhill can do it under control, can gain push through power coming from inertia, like not just like walking you back, but their ability to kind of fire off the ball, get off quickly to anyone else, and then convert that into the ability to push it to the interior offensive lineman into the backfield. And then anything else really for me is a bonus. Like I just want that explosiveness off the ball because I think that is the easiest way to build a pass rusher from the interior is then to add moves on top of that. So for me, like the top 2 guys in this draft class are guys that are really good at that, right? And then under control, making moves off that. And then beyond that, it's a little more blurry to me. But you have to find guys who could play early. You got to find guys who could play on third downs and pass rush. It's a fluid position because I think teams, again, we talked about this in previous videos, like they're going 3-4 deep at edge. They're going 3-4 deep at interior. You need interior guys who can play on first and second down only. You need interior guys who can play on third down only. When you go into your 5 across look, can you add specifically like a 0 and then like a 3-5 on one side, and then maybe you might have a guy who's playing more shading over the guard because you're playing on the short hash side of the field. So this is one of those few positions, in my opinion, that really is a hybrid of scheme fit and physical traits. Whereas I think a lot of them, you can kind of point to one or the other that matters more.
Yeah. All right. So it's an interesting position. It's an interesting position where, the amount of investment that teams make in it varies greatly. We've seen the Browns essentially ignore it. We've seen teams like the 49ers heavily invest into it, and as soon as they move on from one expensive guy, go right back to it in the first round, even with a fairly loaded defensive line as it was. And so I think the opinions on what they need out of these guys, it's different. Than you got teams like the Patriots where it's like they value it, but they value a specific skill set and body type. So that's somewhat more accessible later. But it really is kind of scheme dependent and coaching staff dependent. But as we get to our first guy here, it's someone who we talked about a few minutes ago. Jalen Carter out of Georgia. We did a film review on him already, which is up on the YouTube channel, and it's quite impressive what he does. His physical traits are elite at the defensive tackle position. His balance, quickness, get off, hand usage, pretty much everything that you could want is right up there, which is why he's debatably the best prospect in the entire draft, aside from any of the other concerns that might be emerging. So you can talk about him briefly, but again, if you want further insight into Carter, you can find his individual breakdown.
Yeah, I don't want to talk like too much about Carter as a player just because we have talked about him a lot and also just like everything that's going on. Like, I just don't think it would be right to completely break him down right now. But again, this is a guy that hits the marks like power out of stance, closing speed, positional versatility. He might freelance a little bit too much at times because of how much Georgia asked him to do, but he's been one of the better players in this draft class from the beginning. And then obviously now the question is emerging. We'll see if that continues to be the case. For now, he would probably still be my number one defensive tackle, but we have a ways to go in figuring all this out.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to a player that we haven't talked about a whole heck of a lot. Your number 2 is Kalijah Cansey, who is a defensive tackle from Pitt. So I was just watching a little bit of tape on him, and he's an interesting guy. I don't know what his measurables are off the top of my head, but that's probably going to be something that will be talked about because you can kind of see him out there. But he can hold the point of attack pretty well, I think, for the size that he appears to be. And he can make some splash plays too. So what do you think about Kalijah Cansey?
So one other first round grade here on the interior. And I've been a fan of Cansey for a while here. I think he's been kind of, again, like I don't care as much about size as a lot of these people do. And I think that's kind of why he gets thrown down boards a little bit. But Mel Kiper had him as a top 10 pick in his first mock. Like Mel Kiper's a huge fan, and he's inconsistent as hell when it comes to like whether size matters or not. So this is a guy that clearly the physical traits in other cases have mattered. He's listed as 6 foot 280. I wouldn't be surprised if he's 5'11", 275, which is going to be a really strange body type for interior players. And there's no comp for him. It's kind of like Bryce Young. Like, it really is not a comp for a body type like this. But, a lot of people are comparing him to Aaron Donald because it was similar as a guy who we just didn't really have a body type comparison to. I think he is not nearly as strong. He doesn't have the length as Aaron Donald, but he might be faster than Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald has the record, I believe, 40 times. I think he ran a 4.69 at like 280 or whatever. Maybe he just had to remember 290. Cansey supposedly might run in the is it high 4.6s? Is that how you're supposed to say it when it's like 4.60? I feel like I always get this confused.
That's the low 4.6s.
Okay, that's low 4.6s. Okay, so he might. Yeah, I don't know why I get that mixed up, but to me, like higher is better. So like I don't know, but in the low 4.6s, he might.
A high draft pick is first overall, right? So it's
I guess okay, so that makes sense. He might run in the high 4.6s and just blow. That would be the new record for an interior defensive lineman. And then if he comes in with a measurables, and we're talking about a guy who, obviously has this quick twitch explosiveness, has the power. He's really good. He has natural leverage because of his height. He can kind of just get under your shoulder pads and run you backwards into the quarterback. I'm excited to do his tape breakdown because there's a lot of fun stuff to look at there. But he might be a guy where you just say, all right, we're going to slim you down and stick you on the edge because it's just, he is too unique of an athlete to not have him somewhere on the defensive line. I do think if he runs in the high 4.6s, we're talking about a guy who potentially does get taken in the top 15 picks of the draft, just because that is such a unique physical skill set. And he has the production in college. Right now, the thing that's holding him back is that people think he's physically limited, and something like that type of 40 time or a really good 3-cone could kind of offset that.
Yeah, he's interesting. He's stronger than you would expect him to be at his size. I mean, you can see him hold the point pretty well, and and two gap. I don't think he'll do that a ton at the next level, but the simple fact that he could against a team like Tennessee is impressive enough, so I think you just need to be aware of what you want to do with him, but also I don't think he's a total liability if you do want to play him in a situation where a team is going to try and single him out in coverage or in the run game. So I'm interested to do his tape breakdown as well. I've just watched a little bit, but I can see why, especially if you like Get Off, he's your number 2 guy.
Yeah,
all right.
I will say a weakness with him is he has trouble finishing tackles in the backfield. And that's like a small thing, but I think his productivity numbers could be way better if he just could finish sacks. And that's something that I think is just a small tweak.
He also plays kind of nasty. He'll play through the whistle a little bit, especially in terms of taking on a blocker. He'll try and get that guy on his back if he can at the end of the play. So it's always something that you kind of like out of a defensive tackle. All right. Similarly, In terms of get off and quickness, Keanu Benton, the defensive tackle out of Wisconsin, is your number 3 guy. So we saw Benton at the Senior Bowl. He was one of the guys who had the best weeks, especially in terms of the one-on-one drills. He was throwing out a fair number of different moves. Throw out a spin move, I remember. He had some bend for an interior guy. So why don't you tell me what you like in particular about Benton?
So yeah, this is a guy that, like, as a fan of Washington, I'm like, that'd be a great Deron Payne replacement. He played nose at Wisconsin, and he's probably not going to be a nose, although he'll probably be like a 3-1 tech type, where he's going to play 3 tech and reduce down. But he, in like 5 down packages, he'll be like your interior run defender. He didn't really show much pass rush on film because I think Wisconsin, they play kind of a natural 3-4. They develop a lot of outside linebacker types who kind of are more off-ball linebackery than most edge players should be these days, but they collapse the pocket inwards and just kind of let their interior defenders hold up at the point of attack and let the quarterback come to them. So at the Senior Bowl, all that pass rush stuff we saw, we had not seen. And for me, I think it projects favorably that he has the ability to attack upfield and throw out some of these pass rush tools that we didn't see initially. But because of that, I'm intrigued. Like, I think his floor is a really, really good run defender. But that extra pass rush ceiling that we haven't quite seen yet maybe gets schematically brought out of him a little bit more, makes him a guy that, early day 2, like really like even one of the first picks of the second round, in my opinion, is a natural like defensive tackle with above 315-pound weight, which are hard to find, who I think immediately is going to be an early down guy who you're hoping could eventually become like a late down productivity pass rusher. But I don't know. I would initially say he's probably a really good first, second down defensive tackle against the run. And then you're hoping that those pass rush moves convert to something more.
I think between the position that they put him in and what he was asked to do, plus the fact that he was in the Big Ten, where you're facing a lot of running offenses anyway. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily get like a lot of pure pass rush reps as a nose tackle. So it was cool that he was able to put some of that on film at the Senior Bowl, and hopefully it helps his stock because a dual threat player like him has a lot of value. So the question is, can he do it consistently at the NFL level? But we will find out, won't we? All right. Next up, you have Siaki Ika. So I know that Kyron is really high on Siaki Ika, and he's more of a true nose tackle. And I mean, big guy. I don't know. I think we talked about him not necessarily having quite the same pocket push ability as a guy like Vita Vea, but maybe similar in terms of overall comp. What do you think about Ika?
Yeah, so he is a limited athlete. Like in space, like he's a guy who hits the turf a lot. He's not really someone you want chasing or pass rushing a whole lot. He's just, this is maybe Jordan Davis without the ceiling of pass rushing, right? Like if he can figure out how to push the pocket a little more, like obviously like there will be Vita Vea comparisons because he's the same type of player where he's 6'3", 350 pounds, and maybe he can slim down a little bit and, show a little more bend than he already has. But he has the ability to effectively toss the interior lineman in front of him to the side and just redirect running backs to places where they lose lots of yards, right? If you're a team with run defense troubles, like this is a guy that you have your eyes on big time because he's especially built to be that like brick wall run defender. Definitely a first 2 down guy early in his career. I don't know if he's going to have much of a pass rush ceiling, but he certainly has the physical strength to become that. He's the type of guy you can probably scheme around a little bit because of what he does well if you're an opposing offense. But we've seen the impact players like this can have in the right defense at the NFL level. He's not a guy that you probably draft as like the first guy you build around defensively, but there are a lot of defenses that are looking for like a natural nose tackle. It's a limited number of players that are specifically like not just nose tackles, but like nose tackles that are this build, like gigantic type players that you don't play on every down because they are that big. And I was saying another plus for him is like at Baylor, he played pretty much every down at that size, and that's tough to do. That was a knock on Jordan Davis, right? Like that guy played early downs early in the game, and then in the second half, like he just was not on the field because he would get winded. Ika doesn't get tired; like he just keeps going. So he's a guy that they play in, play out, will show up to you, and whether you're going up against the Eagles offense, will like take care of the interior runs, and then you can kind of focus on Hurts a little more in terms of your linebackers. So there's a lot of value to this type of player because of what the player he is. Like he's not going to get a top 10 pick, but he could see his value in the draft rise just because there are teams who specifically are looking for this piece.
He might be a guy who'll help his stock with testing a little bit because, one of the other things that's tough is playing at Baylor as a true monster nose tackle. You're in the Big 12. You got all these teams who are, playing all these spread formations or getting the ball out quick. It doesn't really give you a ton of time to shine. Plus, a lot of the knocks on you will be like, you're not going up against the best competition ever. So it's like, and you don't have a Creed Humphrey in Oklahoma to like get those tape reps on, this year. I'm not sure there's anybody in the Big 12 that's like giving you that kind of competition. So, I mean, you would probably know a little bit better than I, but this is not the best situation for him to show his wares, so to speak. So he's a guy who could be a better NFL player than college player.
Yeah, West Virginia was probably the best like natural run offense in the Big 12 last year, and he had a really good game against them. So, that part checked off pretty well. And he, even Texas, like when we go over his tape, there are a couple plays where, he penetrates the gap really well. They're in a 2-gapping scheme, like they run 3-3-5, like a lot of teams do in the Big 12 because of the passing. So they're asking the 2-gap, and he has the ability to quite literally just like if he can get the offensive lineman to the ground, he takes up both of the gaps on his own. So then Bijan Robinson would have to like bounce the run, which, of course he was able to because he's Bijan Robinson. But Ika takes up 2 gaps on its own. That's the value.
All right. And so for your final defensive tackle, we have Brian Brissy, who is from Clemson, right?
Mm-hmm. And he's a DMV guy, so I really wanted to like him a little higher on my board, but he just hasn't had the tape. Like he had a really unfortunate season. He had some off-field things that he was dealing with, with his family, with some like health things, and that was sad to see. And it's awesome that he got to play as well as he did in some of the games he got back to. But he's just kind of had an unfortunately difficult career in terms of just like non-football things and injuries and stuff like that. At Clemson, he hasn't really ever been able to fully develop, but the physical traits are there. Like he has the strength, he has the get off. It's just not consistent yet. He has maybe some of the best lateral movement ability I've seen from a defensive tackle. He even like at his size probably is a guy that can play some edge for you because he's got the ability to kind of bend on the edge. He hasn't shown it in the interior, but he has the flexibility and the athleticism, but he is raw as ever at this point. And really, I would even like, he's one of these guys that like he's coming out because a lot of people thought he could have been a top 10 pick. And so he was ready to go to the NFL this year, but he could probably benefit from another year in college. He's just not going to. There's a lack of a pass rush plan. I think his position, like initially, like he is definitely a 3 tech, but I don't know what he reduces to in base packages or in like 5 down packages. He's going to have to rotate early in his career because you just don't have a guy who's super disciplined with, with gap control and with pass rush toolbox yet. And he's toolsy as heck, but not ready really to be that productive player in the NFL.
You can see size, length. He has power when he has the right leverage. And you don't see a clear intent on a lot of his plays. You see a guy that's just like getting in there, kind of mashing around. He's not necessarily dominating anyone on any given play. He can hold up to double teams, which is pretty impressive because he's not just like, a mass of guys, but he'll also get put on his back by one guy. You know what I mean? So there's an overall lack of consistency and refinement with him. You can see clear as day. He'll overrun a gap. Like, I'm literally just saying what I'm seeing one play after another right now. So you can kind of see the whole gamut with him. and it's you don't need to watch a whole lot to see the variance in his play style.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk edge. Everybody wants a pass rusher on the outside, so let's talk about who we've got here.
Yeah. So Kyron's talked a lot about. Well, let's just talk about the edge position first. Yeah, because we did this with defensive tackles too. Who I look at. Similarly, I like get off. I think guys that can get off the ball quick are awesome, but I want to see you have kind of a go-to move, and I want to see some thought process as to what you're going to try to do when that move doesn't work. If you're going to be a top pick for me, because I think to have like a fully fleshed out pass rush toolbox in college doesn't happen. Sometimes you get a guy like Arnold Evacchetti in like year 5, and he does, and he was even a better athlete than a lot of people thought. So I actually had a really high grade on him last year, but a lot of these guys do not have fully fleshed out pass rush toolboxes. They have their initial plan. They're working on it. And then beyond that, it's physical traits, because quite frankly, physical traits make edge rushers. That's what gets you drafted highly in this league, which is a little bit of a lazy take, but there's a high correlation between success and that. Whether it takes you until year 3 to get there, sure. But guys who are longer, stronger, bigger, and can run are better edge rushers. It's just the way it's gone.
Yep. Like you said, it's a fairly established group to scout, and we're seeing a lot of the first round picks become good players, even if it takes a couple of years. I mean, can you point to a first round pick that was a major bust over the past few years, except for guys that maybe shouldn't have been taken as high as they have been? Caleb Von Chason, but he's like such a tweener, not really an edge guy, and he was just a super athlete that didn't have the size to play like hand in the dirt, and didn't really play like, I don't know, he was a tough one. But who else has really been like a total miss?
There really haven't been many. I mean, this is a position we've gotten very good at scouting. We could go back through kind of like, people are probably calling Trevon Walker a bust right now, but that's ridiculous because
it's a little too soon. I think.
It was never going to be a plan for him to like be good year 1. If we go back 2 years ago, this was not a good edge rusher draft. Kwity Paye, I think, has had a decent career, and we can't really like say that he's done anything wrong yet. Jalen Phillips worked at. Jalen Phillips, a guy who just didn't really fully produce in college, and was all about like recruitment and tools. And like that guy has been a good player. Jalen Phillips is. Clavon Chason didn't really have a fleshed out pass rush plan. He was more just like he could get upfield quickly and didn't really have the bend or the hands to deal with it. Year before that was a great. So Cleveland Farrell was not a toolsy guy who went 4th overall, and the Raiders drafted him because they were like, we like his motor and we like his like off-field like persona, like he's gonna be a team captain. That was the last bust, and they didn't really think about physical traits of that guy. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, we've had a lot of guys who the traits have translated. I mean, you look at a guy like Greg Russo, you see him coming on a little bit. You see guys like who else came out in 2020? Couple other guys. There was Chase Young. The year before that, you got Montez Sweat. You got Brian Burns. You got all these toolsy guys who
even like Odafe Owe, who did not have a sack in college, and it was all like, oh, that guy ran a 4.3. He's an edge player, like, and people were like, all right, well, okay. And then he's been a rotational player because it's how Baltimore scheme works, but he's been really good for them.
So, traits overall else, production secondary. Don't be as slow on the edge, or put on weight and become an interior player, I guess is what Nick is saying.
Yeah. And, it's nice to see the traits translate in the film, and we'll talk about that.
For sure. I mean, that's going to get you taking over others, is certainly. But, all right, shocker, Will Anderson Jr. out of Alabama is your number 1 edge player. So I want to talk about Anderson a little bit. He'll probably be one of the next. We still have a couple of wideouts that will be dropped coming up soon for our individual film breakdowns, but Anderson is probably a guy who's coming up pretty soon in terms of our breakdown as well. So you can be on the lookout for him.
Yeah. The more I watch, and we're going to talk about Tyree Wilson next, the more I watch this, like I think it might have been closer between the first two than I thought, which Kyron's going to hate. But Anderson's best film was last year. They had him playing a lot more 4-eye this year. He did this past season. 2 years ago, he did that as well. He was kind of playing 4-eye and kind of a stand-up outside linebacker role. He's a stand-up outside linebacker. And my comp for him is not Von Miller, it's Micah Parsons, because although I think he does have the bend and the speed, I think he's better transitioning from speed to power than anybody else I've seen probably since Parsons, just initially. Like, he's a little light. He's probably going to be in the 245 range, 6'3". Like, he's not like an amazingly long length guy. Like, I think he's good arm length probably. But his ability to kind of get off the ball and then just shove the tackle back into the quarterback is elite in this draft class. I think the other thing he's got going for him is he's got tremendous motor. Like, this is a guy that will chase down the play from the backside and make tackles, but also will, pick up fumbles because he's the guy trailing the play. And just some of the best motor I've seen for a player probably since Von Miller, which is probably why he gets those comps, right? So, this is your closing speed first edge player who needs to kind of develop a little bit more with his hands, but we've seen kind of like he talked about the other day, he loves the forklift move, which is just kind of initially a bend thing, and then you kind of get all your body weight going forward and you lift with your arms and you just kind of attack the quarterback arms up. I would like to see a little bit more technically, his ability to kind of rip and swim and swat the hands of the tackles, but his physical profile and ability to just kind of out athleticism some of the tackles he's going up against in the SEC is impressive. It leads the production, half of the production, because I think the other half of his production is just an uncanny ability to finish plays because he doesn't quit. But that has an importance too, because this is a guy that kind of sets the tone for your defense.
Well, and as an as a stand-up outside linebacker type, he's not necessarily dominant at the point of attack. He has the quickness to shed, but his best attribute against the run is when he's coming off of either the backside or not right on, because he's athletic enough to run through a lot of the trash and then make a tackle near the line of scrimmage, especially with some of those outside zone plays. It's pretty impressive to see. If the tackle's taking him head on and trying to push him, he can be pushed a little bit by stronger tackles, but the quickness and the balance, the get off, it's all there. And like you said, he is a finisher as well, which is something that's underrated. And I'm not sure how easy that is to actually teach somebody. Yeah,
agreed. Like, I think there are players that just have it and don't. And I think it's, I don't know if it's an effort thing, but it's like the ability to tackle when you're not in the best body control situation. And he has that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So tell me, why is Tyree Wilson close to Will Anderson in this class?
I think that his physical profile is probably the best of any player in this edge group. Maybe like he is, be 6'5", 275. He's going to run a nice 40. His three cone's going to be great. He can lift. His problem is he plays a little upright, needs to kind of learn how to deal with bend because he's off balance when he does try, and he doesn't necessarily have the patience to hold spaces always in the run game because he loves attacking towards the ball. But when this guy just again, speed to power conversion is impressive. Like, he plants tackles in the dirt sometimes and, doesn't do much else sometimes because he just kind of does that and hits the ground because he doesn't have the balance necessarily to stay up. But the length is there. He has active hands. I think you see him. He doesn't necessarily have the pass rush plan, but he has the moves, he is doing his best to beat tackles in different ways and show different looks. The productivity maybe matters less because it's the Big 12. But it is clear when you watch this guy, he pops on the tape. I think he's a guy who will produce day one in the NFL just because he is physically a different type of player and has the juice, the energy in his game that makes him a problem. I think that's something else that I think he and Anderson have in this class that other players don't necessarily have, where it's a relentlessness to just play in and play out, put in 100%. That's what you need from your edge player. And this guy is just going to try and kill the quarterback on every play.
Yeah. He's a big dude. He looks funny whenever he starts in a standing position at a 2-point stance. Do you remember how Zaven Collins looked at Tulsa? He just looked weirdly bigger than anybody else that was standing up on the field. That's exactly what he reminds me of. He plays on the outside more. Collins played a lot like off-ball linebacker, but his arms are so long and he's so tall, and he wears number 19. So he's just this. That's like just like a long number with his body, his torso length, and everything. So he's just this long looming prospect, but he's also pretty thick as well. I mean, he's got some real density to him. You know, he can shimmy like a basketball player. Like it's pretty impressive. I mean, I haven't seen, you know, some of the stuff that I'm talking about, I'm just watching live, but I haven't seen any like high quality pass rush reps yet. But I mean, you can see the traits with very little, you know, like very little time investment.
Yeah, and he
powerful long arm.
Yeah, his long arm is his favorite move probably. He doesn't have necessarily the motor to like chase down the plays that Anderson does, and definitely not the speed. But because of his length, he has like this insane range where you will see sometimes like an inside zone run play, like break through, and it only goes for 5 yards because he can like dive from his 5-tech spot to like the Mike spot and make the tackle on one dive, you know, like which is just the guy just like lays out and makes a play because he's that type of athlete. I do think like he's going to be a hand of the dirt guy at the NFL level. He might even have the ability on certain plays if you have certain packages to reduce down because of his size. But you know, again, tools are there. I think they show on tape. The productivity occurs in games inconsistently. For example, like I think the Baylor game, which is lesser competition, like he wasn't as good. But the TCU game, which is a quick offense, gets the ball out quick. Like he was everywhere in that game. So, you know, it's about getting that consistency. And I think generally the NFL has shown ability to take these type of talents and make them work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's still some refinement that needs to be made. I mean, he lets himself get knocked down by smaller players if they get him on the side. You know, there's some awareness stuff there. And not sometimes you can see that there is like a lack of anticipation for the snap. So like, you know, you might have good physical get off, but it might not always translate to in-game effectiveness. So he needs some work, definitely needs some work coming out of Texas Tech. But if you're a believer in the traits, he's got them 100%. All right. Next up, we have Nolan Smith as your number 3 edge rusher.
Yep. So this is like your lesser Will Anderson almost in this class. I think you could probably do more with Will Anderson in terms of like moving him around and pass rushing from different spots. Like you might have the athleticism of like kind of an opposite of Micah Parsons. Well, and that's now what actually Micah Parsons does, where you can stick him at Mike and just see what happens. Smith is stand-up outside linebacker, and that's all he can be. He's undersized, 235. I think he'll probably get up to the 240s, but he has the explosiveness and the speed off the ball. He knows how to win with bend. He just wasn't a consistent, like they always had like a third down designated pass rusher who was a big part of the defense at Georgia, and that's who he was. And I think early in the NFL, like he might be that, but I think the projection for him eventually will be like a speed rusher type who I think can play down in, down out, has the athletic profile that he eventually will develop better in the run game and should produce as a pass rusher as he did throughout college. I mean, this was one of the better players on the front seven of Georgia, always was a big time recruit. And I think unlike Brian Bresee, you've seen him work with those tools at the same. No, those back-to-back classes. Bresee was the year after, but who was Smith over? He was one spot over somebody who was a big deal who got drafted. Kayvon Thibodeau was the guy right behind him in that recruitment class. He's, you know, he had that athletic profile in high school. And I think it again is a guy who has the translation of speed to power. And if you're looking for that speed rusher specifically, it's him.
Yep. And he plays with intent, which is something that you don't really see out of Bresee. I mean, he'll take on a tackle with a pulling guard. And at his size, you wouldn't necessarily expect him to hold ground the way that he does, but he'll drop his pad level and take that on and stop him in his tracks. So he's a tough player. He's he's SEC made, as Kyron would say. He is definitely you look at him just like physical profile wise, 235, and you don't expect it necessarily, but just from the little I've seen of him, I like him a lot already. I think you're going to get a high effort player from him for sure. All right. Next up, we have Keon White. All right. So Keon White is an interesting guy. There are some fairly heavy differences in people's takes on Keon White. So what brings him in at number 4 for you?
Yeah, so for me, I think I like him more than Lucas Van Ness as a guy who hadn't produced maybe as much as you'd like from a high pick, but physical tools to me are more unique and work better for what I want. And that I think he's just like a very unique defensive line talent. I know we haven't listed his edge, but I really think he is just a defensive lineman. He's going to play 3 and 5. He is a real rotational guy, and I'm excited about it. At 6'5", 280, his ability to move. He's going to blow up the combine this week. And I think he gets overlooked because of where he played at Georgia Tech. Again, a guy I think that has the ability to walk back tackles in a way that's explosive and quick and allows him to break up plays. Maybe showed more run defense ability in college, but I think at the Senior Bowl, we really saw him working against some of these top tackle prospects, and he's working with the same pass rush coach as Keanu Benton, showed more of a toolbox than I had seen from him prior on film. And I'm intrigued by it. And I think, teams can really surround an identity around a guy like this who can kind of do anything for them as a pass rusher. Like you could line him up on the inside, on the outside, you could stand him up. You could kind of move him around and really put a stress on the offense in terms of like how they're going to protect against this guy. And I think he's just, again, a unique physical profile that I saw translate against better players, and I would buy into it.
All right. Yeah. I'm not deep enough into him to have a strong take. I mean, I think you need some time investment to see what he's really good at. Some guys it just pops immediately. All right, number 5, Will McDonald the 4th. There we go. All right, so Will McDonald is from Iowa State. What brings him in at number 5 for you?
So he is speed rusher first and always, and I don't know if he necessarily has the power, but he has the hands to win as a speed rusher, and that's going to be his trick over and over again until he can find some way to build off of it. He hasn't really developed it yet, but my thing with him was I thought his tape was great. It was Big 12, right? And I was kind of like, all right, well, for Tyree Wilson to kind of win against these quick-hitting offenses with power, that's impressive to me, because a lot when you have these teams who are just running the ball or throwing the ball out quick to like bubble screens or even downfield, like these offenses are spread out and quick developing, kind of like Tennessee. It's hard as a power rusher to affect the game against that, and he did. As a speed rusher, though, it's a little easier. So I wanted to see that at the Senior Bowl, and he was one of the better players at the Senior Bowl, period. Like working against even better competition as tackles, just throwing out the speed rush move over and over and over again. It gave guys like Darnell Wright problems. And even when getting engaged, like he showed the ability to kind of shock the hands downwards and then slip underneath and rip through while keeping his speed the same and accelerating towards the quarterback. Might be a guy that, as a floor is like, a third guy you bring in as some extra pass rush juice on passing downs. But I think he's a guy you bring in opposite of a power rusher and can produce for you early.
Yeah. His change of direction is quite impressive. His ability to get going from a complete standstill out of a 2-point stance is impressive. It's tough. Even as a speed rusher, you're not necessarily going to get a ton of pressures in the Big 12 where teams are getting the ball out super quick. So, all right. Next up, Lucas Van Ness. Van Ness is a guy that people have been mocking going as high as top 7 or 8 picks. You clearly have him down a bit. If he's your 6th overall edge rusher, you probably wouldn't be drafting him in the top 15, I would imagine, or maybe you would, but clearly there's other guys that you like better. So what is it about Van Ness's game that you do like, and then what is it that holds him back a little bit for you versus other evaluators?
Yeah, so his peaks are really impressive. He has the same physical mold as a Tyree Wilson. I don't think his movement skills are as good. And I also don't know that he plays with a similar relentlessness, although he has kind of taken on some of these Big Ten offensive linemen, which are really tough to play against, and shown like his physicality and strength against them coming downhill. He had some really high end reps against guys like Peter Skoronski and Paris Johnson. And that's why he's probably getting boosted up in the draft. But there are periods of his play where he just doesn't do much, and I think he's still developing as a player. Iowa defensively, it's a fun scheme to watch, but it doesn't necessarily prepare these guys always for the NFL because they will play guys in different roles, and he's kind of played a lot of stand-up outside linebacker, and I think he's definitely going to be a hand-in-the-dirt guy who's even closer probably to playing free tech than he is to standing up in the NFL. But I would like to see how he tests. I'm not certain that his movement skills are as good as some of the guys I have higher on this board, and I think again, traits are king, and I want to see them translate. This guy has the power and the get-off ability. But I'm not certain that he has necessarily shown it on film consistently enough yet. The high ends are so high that I think some people see him knock down a Paris Johnson. And they go, wow, that's unbelievable. No one else has done that. I'm going to take him top 10. For me, it's more that I want to see guys do that a little more consistently than against the best competition.
Interesting for him. He has some nice balance and core strength. I see. I know that this is a lofty comparison, but some of that profile, the way he moves, that core torque, he kind of reminds me of JJ Watt a little bit. I don't know if his arms are quite as long, but that he reminds me of him coming out. I mean, I know it's lofty because one of the best defensive players ever, but kind of looks like him. What's his height? What are his listed measurables?
5'2", 275.
6'5".
I don't think he's
not as long.
275. I think that's going to be lower.
You think it's going to be lower?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I could see it. I mean, I could see it close. He looks pretty rock solid. He plays with good strength. I don't know. He's an intriguing guy. I think he would be ideally suited, maybe even to put on a slightly more weight then, and just be that 3-4 D end and just rush, be the strong side rusher, when you get into sub packages, but or maybe move in even farther, but that is a perfect, just the role that JJ Watt played, at least I think is perfect for him. Again, based on the little that I've watched.
Yes.
But yeah, interesting guy.
Definitely an interesting guy. And he's a guy that I probably need to watch a little more of too. Some of this board, especially at edge, for me, it's going to be ever evolving because this is a position group that I think I need to watch as many games as possible because some of these guys have games that are outrageously good and then they just don't do anything else. And it's hard to kind of gauge that because see one of the plays where he just knocks a tackle right over.
It wasn't a tackle. I think it was CJ Stroud. Stroud handed the ball off and came out of a rollout and he just blew him up. He just but no, I mean I like his balance though. I think his balance is really good, and I think that's one of the things that reminds me of JJ is that Watt, he had some really special traits, but it's just no matter what he did, he never looked like he was about to tip over, and he kind of reminds me of him in that way. And maybe it's just because he's also white, but I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to BJ Ojulari here, who is your number 7 edge rusher.
Yeah. So this is kind of where the line would probably be for first round grades, although again, ever evolving. Ojulari again is kind of to me a lesser Will McDonald, where his move is the speed rush. I think he has some trouble at the point of attack holding up against the run, but he's definitely found a way to produce as a speed rusher consistently and against the SEC. I just think McDonald, what he did at the Senior Bowl was more impressive, I think, than anything, quite frankly, that Ojulari didn't have one game where he dominated as a pass rusher. It's flashes consistently every game, but to me, this is a guy that I really want to be my third guy as a DPR that comes on, and I think that's what his career is, though. I don't know that he can become a full free down player. And I will say, like, he is similar to his brother Aziz, with a little bit of a bigger build. I think Aziz, because of the way he was built, had an easier time kind of bending and just being that speed only guy. Whereas Ojulari is a little bit, he's kind of a speed rusher that isn't built like your normal speed rusher. He's more in the 250s in terms of weight. I don't think he carries that in a way that like allows him to kind of be a Brian Burns type, where he really is like able to move his best at that weight. And because of that, I think, you see him not necessarily always have the best control when he's engaged with offensive linemen. He did play every down for LSU almost. So, you often saw him trying to set the edge. And I think he's better when he's able to fend with one arm and kind of be loose and play in space than he is when he's like fully trying to like rip into like maybe the B gap and make a tackle.
Yeah, you can see there it's a little chaotic at times. He plays with ferocity, which is nice, especially the longer the play goes, the harder he plays into it, which is definitely something you want out of a defensive lineman. He's a guy that could potentially grow into his body a little bit more too, so this might be a guy where he goes on traits and then you don't really see much of it year one, but by the time that you get to year 3, we're talking about him as like, a top 10 to 15 type pass rusher in the NFL. Again, I'd have to do a lot deeper dive on him. Like some guys just pop, some guys just like, it's not that the ones that don't pop aren't good, but you just need to see more exactly how you envision them translating. And I don't see anything obvious with him. Again, I mean, LSU, they've got him like standing up in coverage at times. And like, that's probably not something you ever really want to do with him in the NFL. So it's like, there's a projection there. I mean, I love the physicality that he plays with. But that's about as much credit as I can give him just off of a quick look. But we're getting up there, so we've got a couple guys left. You've got Isaiah Foskey next, and he's Florida State, right?
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. All right. So Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame is your number 8 guy. And what is it about Foskey that because I've seen him rated pretty highly by some people as well. So what puts him down the list for you?
So he's more solidly built. Like this is more, we keep like almost all these guys in this list at this point have either been like 250 and lighter and speed rushers or 275 and power rushers, right? He's a little bit more in the middle, and I think more of your natural 3-down edge guy who I don't think will be, maybe this 10-sack guy, but he'll be solid. I think as a run defender and a guy who can win off the edge using his hands and then bending because he has kind of the ability to move a little bit still, not being like as gigantic as some of these other players. I think his better year was last year, not this year at Notre Dame, but he plays with kind of point of attack physicality that I want, where he can, use long arms to kind of have leverage against the run game and make tackles and keep his balance. And then as a pass rusher, there's a ways to go in terms of him developing a toolbox, but I think he does a good job of kind of getting vertical to horizontal to attack the quarterback and using his, hands and hips to leverage that.
Yeah. You can see traits there too. I think a little more awareness would benefit him. I'm seeing him multiple times get knocked down by like a chip. Either he's getting hit by a guard when he's going up against a tackle, then he's going down on his right side, or he's taking a chip from the outside when he's going up against a tackle, and then he's falling down in the other direction. Doesn't seem to be fully aware of other potential blockers. He leans a little bit too. So like he's got that length. Sometimes he leans into it and gives up the leverage where he can be pulled downwards. So, I'd have to, again, another guy that I got to watch more on, but you can see some incompleteness to his tape. All right, Miles Murphy. What a fall for you. I know you said before that you weren't super high on him, but coming in at number 9, why is that?
Yeah, and I think, again, as I dive in further, maybe he moves up this board. He could also move down because there's other guys I need to watch more behind him. But for me, there's a couple of things that I think are a problem with him. First of all, as Kyron has mentioned earlier, like I don't think Clemson defensive linemen are coached up well. Like I think they just kind of do what they need to do to get downfield towards the ball, and they don't they don't have the best discipline. And for him, there's like an inconsistency of brilliance where he like has this amazing football intelligence plays, and then he just does like dumb things where he's completely taking himself out of the gap and giving up something. And then also like you see the athleticism sometimes, but there's a lot of times where it's like, really, like you just got like manhandled by a tight end and you had leverage. Like for him, like he's very clearly been a high school athleticism projection. And there are amazing reps on tape where he does kind of more like what we're talking about with Foskey, where he has the ability with his hands and hips to kind of generate pass rush through technique, but he doesn't have the speed alone to do it. I don't think he has the power downhill alone to do it. Even though his get off is decent, he just doesn't generate like power straight out of that, which is something maybe that can come from, working with a better pass rusher coach. But he's a projection, like he needs to develop. I think year one, like he's a really good run defender. Like this guy knows how to set the edge and he can hold space up. But another thing for me is like physique wise, he's also 6'5", 275. But when we talk about Tyree Wilson, Lucas Van Ness, and even like a Keon White, like those guys, like, and they all these guys have length. But when I look at them, like I think that their size is more because they are clearly like jacked up in the places that matters, whether that be like calves, thighs, forearms, biceps. With Miles Murphy, like I think his body's a little more sloppy. He needs to cut maybe a little. I don't think 275 is the way he should be playing. I think he needs to be playing lighter, and I think that would help him translate that get off initially more into either a speed win or a power win. And I think he's a guy who needs to kind of rearrange what type of player he is other than just a run defender at the NFL level. And if that doesn't happen, he's just going to be a really good run defender initially.
I'm curious to see, like, I don't really know how Clemson instructs their defensive linemen to play because I don't really see much in terms of play aggressiveness. Like, he's not really anticipating the play and getting after it. It's like every single play, he's waiting to see what happens and then moving towards the ball.
Yeah.
And sometimes
there's some weird
works,
things.
but
There's some weird things like against Notre Dame. Like there's a play where Michael Mayer goes in motion and he follows as the edge player, and then they run back the other way and there's nobody there. And like, I need to talk to Kyron about that. Maybe there's some technique where the edge player is supposed to follow the tight end, but it just makes no sense to me personally because he let them have kind of the split zone run to that side and just a free lane to the corner, to the slot corner. Like, and maybe it's like their number one priority is like making sure they don't have the tight end overlap or something. But I don't know. It is a strange defense to watch because it does look like they let a lot of things come to them. But then also when they do kind of penetrate a gap and get in the lane, they do not do a good job of gap control. And maybe that's because it doesn't happen that often and they don't play that way. But they are a very like let things come to them defense for sure, which is stylistically to me like not something I necessarily want to see, especially from like a traitsy player in college, because it doesn't show me if that's translating, first of all. But second of all, in the NFL, like the less aggressive defenses are still kind of attacking in that they're going to play upfield and attack the run. And then if they call this like playing the run to the passer, like you kind of play under control as a unit through the run to the passer, whereas the more aggressive units are just like the edge players are attacking the quarterback at all times, and then the interior is trying to hold point of attack and see if they can shed, which neither of those is happening here.
And it just doesn't give you really any indication of how much anticipation he might have. So, like, you would need to understand his football IQ exclusively through interviews and stuff like that, which obviously we don't really have access to. But, all right, so, I mean, it'll be curious to see what the reports are with him coming out of the combine are.
And again,
so keep an eye on him.
Between him, Van Ness, White, and Wilson, like all of them have the length and the strength, right? For me, like literally those four guys, it might just be movement ability that's ranking them because I think, again, traits matter. I think Wilson has this long stride. It's a fluid mover. Keon White can run for a guy who's 290. Like it's unbelievable. Van Ness, I don't think can move amazingly, but you talk about his balance, his fluidity, like ability to kind of stop and start. Like he has that. Murphy, I'm not convinced like has a movement skill that's unique to him. I think he's more just power and length right now.
All right, so that takes us to our final guy. Oh, I don't think I've said this out loud before. So Felix Anundike Uzoma. number 10.
It's probably right. Yeah, so this is your elite bender in this draft class. He is a really kind of strange body type where he is kind of a long-legged edge rusher. He's more like this. He's like 6'2", 250. Like he's like a weird one. Might be 260. Really, really strong like legs. Like he's kind of like a body control edge rusher where he will get off the ball, kind of lean into you, and then use his legs to drive through contact, but can also get like really, really low to the ground, and not just like with bend. Like he can like play parallel, like leaning and using his legs to stay upright. He's very technical, but I don't think he's a guy who's going to blow up the combine. But if you listen to his interview the other day, like this is a guy that literally like talked people through like his whole pass rush process. It was really fun to watch, where he talked about like how he sets up tackles from, initially like trying to push outside, but then if he's leveraging with his inside arm, he can then use kind of his ability to spin move off of them back inside, where he has, more bend ability to kind of play downhill towards the quarterback, where if he is falling into the quarterback, he's very good at like still staying upright and moving all fluidly through that. He is just very flexible, like that's Felix is flexible. Like I don't that is his unique trait. And I think he's probably going to have a really good 3-cone, but I don't know beyond that physically, like what he's going to do very well at the combine. But the production was there in college, and there are teams that have viewed this guy early in the process as a guy who could be a top 10 pick because of how naturally he bends. And that is something that you hear so many people talk about. It's something that often develops at the NFL level. I don't know what beyond that you build, because you don't ever really see edge players who's like, oh yeah, that guy bends really, really well, but we don't know what else he does well. He's kind of in that realm, except for I do think this is a guy who is a veteran pass rusher at the collegiate level.
Yeah, interesting. So they're running some interesting fronts. The first play that popped up was like a 2-3-6 look, and so like you're not necessarily getting quality.
Yeah, and the Big 12
reps off that.
So yeah, that doesn't help either.
Yeah, he has good pad level. He's got long arms. You can see that. I need to watch more of him, but the way that you talk about him, that's always something that is high on my list of priorities for a guy. A player who can speak eloquently about the game and about how he plays it is not the end all be all. Ultimately, you need big, fast, strong guys. But high leverage moments are really important. And I think guys that spend the entirety of the game setting up their opponent usually come through for you at the end. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's a good player just off of that alone. But there's and it's like they're running odd fronts, and I don't know. Again, he's another guy I got to watch a lot more of. But okay, so that's going to do it for today's show. This was a fun one. I do love watching defensive line play. So for me, it's receivers, DBs, and defensive line are my favorite positions to watch. And I think everywhere else has their place in my heart, but those are prospects I like to evaluate the most. Now, keep a lookout for all of our individual prospect breakdowns. They're the DTF film sessions. We've got, I think, 6 of them live right now. We're going to have a number of wide receivers dropping soon, and then I think we're going to get more into the defensive linemen, but we'll see how that goes. You can watch out for Kyron and I doing our brick wall offensive line film breakdowns. And every Monday and Thursday, you can find us live here on YouTube or on the podcast feed, Defiant Takes Football. For all that, DefiantTakesFootball.com. We have our player profiles going up, news articles, and at Defiant Takes on all social media outlets. So I think that's going to do it for us. I want to shout out Noah Ashley. Wasn't here with us today, but helped set up everything as always. He's our producer, doing a fantastic job for us. Nick at Nick with Sports on Twitter. You can find me at VMaxDean on Twitter. I think that's it for all the shout outs. Thanks to all the watchers, viewers, Throw us a like if you like what we do here, and subscribe, all that good stuff. Throw us a review, anything that helps us grow and do more of this content consistently. We appreciate that. Nick, man, thank you for doing all the work that you do. It's a lot of prospects we just talked about, and we shall be back this coming Monday.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.